Veterans Chronicles is sponsored by the state of Qatar, representing Qatar's commitment to the U.S.
Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos, honored to be joined once again on Veterans Chronicles by retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Jason Redman. He served 11 years as an enlisted Navy SEAL, followed by 10 years as a SEAL officer. His determination after suffering severe injuries in Iraq attracted national media attention. He is the author of the best-selling memoir, The Trident, and his new book is Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. And we're happy to announce as we record here in June 2020 that it is #1 in the business teams category on Amazon. And Jason, it's always great to have you with us. Thank you.
Greg, thanks, man. And big shout out to American Veterans Center, all you guys do to honor those who have served.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, Jason has been with us before. So if you haven't seen his full oral history, you can find that whether it's the podcast or the YouTube channel. We're going to be talking a lot about his story today, but in a different context with the principles that are put forward in his book here, Overcome. So Jason, for folks who haven't heard the whole oral history, let's go back to the most challenging moment of your life. You're in 2007, the Al Anbar province in Iraq. You've got an Al-Qaeda target that you're after. Describe the mission and how it unfolded.
Yeah, great. Thanks. It was a very eventful deployment. Those who maybe military historians know that 2006, 2007, the end of 2006 into 2007 was the beginning of the Anbar awakening in Iraq. And it was a period of time where the Iraqi people, and specifically the tribal leaders, said, hey, we've had enough. We finally truly believe that Al-Qaeda is creating more damage than the Americans, and we really think they're trying to help us. So let's help them and take our country back. And for really the first time in the war, they really started providing us very good, actionable intelligence on mid and high level, both Al-Qaeda and insurgent leaders. And we were able to act on that intelligence. So it created a very eventful time, but also a very impactful time for a lot of our military forces, and the SEAL teams included. So throughout 2007, we were tracking mid-level and high-level Al-Qaeda and insurgent leaders throughout the Anbar province. And there was one we really wanted, and he was the #1 leader for Al-Qaeda in the Al Anbar province, an individual that we had crossed paths with a couple of occasions, the very first mission of our deployment, and I wasn't on this mission. It was what we call a turnover mission. So a few of our guys and then a few of the outgoing SEAL team conducted an operation not far from where I ultimately was wounded to go after this leader. And on that night, they stepped into an incredibly chaotic situation. It ended up having multiple guys wounded. We lost a SEAL. Petty Officer Clark Swedler was killed on that night. We lost an Iraqi scout, Iraqi member that we were working with. So, and this was kind of the very first mission that our team and my troop actually executed. So all deployment, we wanted this guy. He was a guy we'd been tracking, and we could never get a specific time and location on him. Fast forward to the very end of the deployment, and we were 1 week from going home, and we got notified that, hey, there's a chance he may be in a specific time and place, something we call a time-sensitive target. So I'll be honest, I did not think the mission was going to go that night. I felt like the information wasn't quite strong enough, but as it developed and moved up the chain of command, around 11 o'clock at night, we got word, hey, you guys are going to go. This is happening. And so we quickly spun up, and obviously we had done a lot of missions over this deployment. So at that point, it was a little bit of, okay, let's come up with our plan. Let's designate who's, doing what parts of the mission. Let's do a quick assessment of the target itself, which was a compound northeast of Fallujah, Iraq, and launched on the mission. Really expected to take some pretty heavy resistance. We were fully expecting this guy was the #1 leader. We knew he traveled with a very large security detail. We knew they were very well trained. We also knew that they had been trained. Most of them wore suicide vests, and they had been trained that to try and create standoff between themselves and the leader. And if individuals got too close, to blow themselves up to try and take us out before we could get to him. So needless to say, a little bit of anxiety, apprehension going on that mission, but, we had been on a lot of missions at this point. So, guys were awesome, consummate professionals, and we loaded onto our Blackhawks and launched. So I was in the lead helicopter, the assault force commander for that mission. And we came in and landed what we call landing directly right on the target, which just due to the timeline we had to do in this situation, which always is a little dangerous because obviously helicopters can be heard a little ways out and gives the enemy time to set up. We landed and we actually were backwards. The helicopter came in reverse of what we had originally planned. So myself and my team leader were supposed to be on the external side of the helicopter, and on the other side was our breacher and point man and our guys that were going to go in first. But the helicopter was actually reversed when we came in. So it ended up being me and my team leader being the first ones to the door. And, in a time-sensitive target, you don't have time to say, oh, hey, let's reposition. I mean, literally milliseconds make a difference. So my team leader was the first guy in the door. I was the second guy in the door. And I remember making entry, thinking to myself, man, I'm about to just get shot to hell. And it didn't happen. There was this huge, we made our entry and there was this huge sense of relief all of a sudden because I'm like, okay, I'm still alive. I haven't been shot yet. And we cleared that target and nobody was there. We found a lot of evidence that somebody had been there recently. And we started to discover IED making components and things that were hidden, buried in the walls and the outer parts of the compound itself. So we stood down, and I mean, it happens a lot, unfortunately. You get intelligence to go after an individual, and sometimes the intelligence is a little bit off. And we kind of thought it was going to be one of those nights. So my team and I were standing down. We were just kind of waiting for our security team to finish cleaning up. They were collecting the explosives and the IED making components. We were going to blow those up, and then we were going to get off that target, and it was going to be at night. It was about, 2:30, maybe close to 3 a.m. at this point. I was sitting there just kind of waiting, and my boss, the ground force commander, came up and said, hey, we got a lot of activity on another house about 150 yards to the north. We just watched 5 individuals flee out of that house and run across the street and hide in some dense vegetation across the street. And we'd seen that before. Obviously, they're not always aware of, snipers are watching them and people are watching them with our external security. So they saw them, and we had seen, like I said, we had seen this before. So usually in Iraq at this time, there was a curfew. And typically good people are not wandering around at night, and they're not running out of houses hiding unless they have something to hide. And especially after blacked out helicopters with guys in night vision just landed and took that down. So my boss said, hey, take your team. Let's maneuver on these guys. Let's wrap them up. Let's find out what they know. Maybe our leader is still in this area. And he was right. So sure enough, I took my team, we maneuvered, and long story short, we walked into a very well executed Al-Qaeda ambush. The 5 individuals were the last part of the security detail for that leader. That leader was actually in that house 150 yards away. And we just walked into a good ambush. They had set up a very good ambush that we walked into. My medic, our corpsman, was initially hit, took a machine gun round right below the knee that severed both bones and kind of dropped him right out front. One of our other guys ran forward and grabbed our medic. As he grabbed him, he got stitched up the side, 2 rounds in the leg and a round in the arm. But still just a very big, strong guy who still managed to grab our medic and, despite his wounds, pull them both back to a tractor tire that was about 15 yards behind me. And really the only point of cover being something that stops bullets between us and thousands of yards of empty Iraqi desert. I tried to lay down some enemy fire as all this was happening, and I was yelling out to our guys, and I think at that point, me yelling attracted a lot of attention, and I had 2 PKM machine guns draw down on me at this point, and probably took some of the most intense fire I think I've ever felt in my life. I literally could feel, the crack of the rounds were going by me, and I literally could feel the pressure from bullets as they went by me. And then I started getting hit, stitched across the body armor. I took 2 rounds in the arm, which I didn't realize it was 2 rounds at the time. I thought I just got hit once, but I did think that my arm got shot off. When it hit me in the elbow, it just deadened all the nerves. It literally felt like I'd been hit by an electrical shock. It hit me in the arm and it traveled up, and I kind of felt it slam me in the back of the head. And suddenly I couldn't feel anything with my left arm. When I reached over, I didn't feel it. It actually kind of dropped and it caught on my gear on the side of my body armor. But my thought was, you just got your arm shot off. Tried to continue to shoot and thinking to myself, I got to get a tourniquet on as quickly as possible. And apparently at that point I had dropped down, and then I stood up. I turned around and stood up. Sometime in this, I got stitched across the body armor. I took rounds off my helmet. I had my left night vision tube shot off. I remember I was taking rounds off my gun. And I turned to move back to that tractor tire where our guys were. And it was at that point I caught a round from behind that hit me right in front of the ear, traveled through my face, exited the right side of my nose, and pretty much just blew out the right side of my face, blew out my right cheekbone, vaporized my orbital fluid, broke all the bones above my eye, shattered my jaw down to my chin, and knocked me out. And my guys saw this and saw me fall, and originally thought I was dead. I guess I was unconscious. I don't know. We don't know how long, at least 5 minutes we estimate. But when I came to, I was laying flat on my back, and literally this gunfight was occurring directly over me. My guys shooting at the enemy, and I was kind of in between them on the ground. Called out to my team leader in a lull of fire and knew I was really messed up, and just said, hey, do we have full head count, and how long till the medevac? And he, I think, dumbfounded, realized that I was still alive at this point. And, they continued to fire. He was trying to get a fire mission. We had an AC-130 gunship up overhead, and we were so close to the enemy. The enemy was only about 45 feet away from us within the vegetation. And they were like, if we bring in these rounds, we'll kill you. I mean, there's just no way we can do this. They said, you've got to figure out a way to fall back. And my team leader said, there's no way. I mean, I've got, 3 seriously injured individuals, and there's no place to go. It's nothing but empty desert behind me. So he called a couple more times, and finally on that third time, at this point, I estimate probably 25 minutes had gone by, maybe even 30 minutes. And he called again and said, hey, look, we're running out of ammo. I got guys that are bleeding out. If this goes much longer, there's not going to be anybody left. And so at that point, the AC-130 gunship agreed to release that fire mission. And he coordinated that. And just a huge shout out to the Air Force and to my team leader, who was one of our joint tactical air controllers who had a lot of experience in doing this. And basically, he told them exactly how he wanted those rounds brought in. And I remember, I'd been in a decent amount of combat at this point. We had called in other fire missions from the gunship. I'd called in a lot of fire missions and training. But it is a pretty, amazing thing to be laying there when, he yelled out to me and said incoming. And you can hear the sound of the gun go off on the aircraft. They're at a specific altitude. They're pretty far away. And you can hear it crump, crump, crump. And I remember laying there hearing that, and all of a sudden, about 5 seconds later, them impact the ground in front of us and blow up over us. And the machine guns were still rattling off when that first fire mission came in, and all of a sudden it went silent. I remember hearing the enemy cry out. Obviously, they were hit by frag, and it stopped that gun. My team leader, at some point in between some of these rounds, ran forward and grabbed me and got me back to the tire. He got a tourniquet on my arm. He saved my life. And we called in additional fire missions. To this day, it is the closest fire mission in the entire Iraq war, literally calling rounds directly on our position. And we managed to get the medevac helicopter in there, and my team leader helped get us and my two teammates onto that Army Special Operations medevac helicopter to get us out of there and save our lives. So, yeah, shout out to my team, for getting us out of there. I mean, I was definitely combat ineffective at that point. I was just focused on staying alive, under all this fire. And shout out to the Air Force. Rightfully so, that aircraft received their 5 key position received distinguished flying crosses, and the rest of the crew received an air medal for the mission that night. My team lead ended up receiving a Silver Star. I would have liked to have seen him get a Navy Cross, but I owe my life to those guys, and it started a whole new journey of getting put back together and coming to understand, a lot of different ways to lead and a lot of different ways to lean forward into positivity.
Just an amazing story of courage and service to our country. And as we mentioned before, you're the author of this brand new book called Overcome. And one of the concepts in this book, Jason, is getting off the X. And so in military terminology, as you point out, that's getting off the spot where you're in grave danger. You describe very vividly in the book about how you thought you were dying. You were getting cold and numb as your body was adjusting to the shock, but somehow you managed, mostly under your own power, to get to the helicopter to get out of there. And so we'll talk about this in a couple different ways. First of all, for you, what did you summon to get off the X?
There were several different things. One of the things, I talk to people about is in tough situations like that, you've got to focus on what you can control. And obviously I wasn't in the fight. I will admit in the very beginning, I was thinking about, the normal tasks that I would do in combat. Where are our guys? Where are we situated? Where's fire coming from? But I kind of quickly realized that I really didn't have much of a part to play in that. My team leader had kind of taken over, and I wasn't in any good position to make sound decisions anyways, as banged up as I was. So then I started to focus on, okay, well, what else can I control? And then, at this point, obviously, I realized, man, you're losing a lot of blood. You're dying, is pretty much what I came to the realization of. And that led me to think about my wife and my kids and how I really wanted to make it home. So I remember thinking of, I had seen a show called Baghdad ER, and it talked about our amazing military medical professionals, and that if you made it to the combat support hospital, the battlefield emergency room, you have a 90% chance of making it home alive if you make it with a pulse. So I remember thinking to myself, that is your goal. That is what you can control, no matter how hard it was to breathe, no matter how tired I felt. I told myself, stay awake to stay alive. I don't care what happens. That is your goal. This is your focus. You've got to go home to see your wife and kids. Said a little prayer to the big man above and said, hey, I need strength to do this. And felt like I got it. Interestingly enough, I write about this in my first book, that I went from really struggling to even move my right hand, which wasn't injured, to, by the time the medevac came in, getting up and walking to the helicopter, with the help of my team lead to get me up. But that's what I focused on. I focused on what I could control. And that's one of the big things that I try to encourage people when you are in a crisis. So often people, they focus on the things that are beyond their control. I've seen it right now. This is June of 2020. We're in the middle of the pandemic. We're, a little bit of, there's a lot of chaos and division in the country. And there's a lot of people that are feeling anxious. They're feeling on the X, if you will, just like I was. And most people, when you're on the X and you're having that overwhelming feeling of anxiety and stress, we focus on that pain and discomfort and, where we are in the moment, when really what we should be doing is looking at how do we move forward and what can I control? And my teammates helped me do that. I focused on what I could control, and it enabled me to get out of that situation. And now that is really what I teach in the book, that I survived an enemy ambush. but everybody gets ambushed in life. We all get on the X at some point. So how do you, A, get off the X? We developed all kinds of steps to do that. And then B, how do you be more proactive in your life to be ready for future ambushes that are coming?
Good point, that everyone's going to encounter something, that it might not be, facing withering enemy fire while you think you're bleeding out in the Iraqi desert, but it could be a loss of a loved one. It could be a financial loss of a job, a myriad of things, but it's going to happen sooner or later. So if it's not happening right now, consider yourself blessed and prepare yourself for what may be coming. And you talk about that a lot as well. Obviously, you prepared for your missions and your operations, but you also talk about preparing for whenever this ambush in life hits. You refer to something called the Pentagon of Peak Performance to basically prepare yourself for that, and then to kind of gauge yourself and motivate yourself once the ambush actually hits. Talk about the Pentagon of Peak Performance a little bit.
Yeah, so the Pentagon of Peak Performance are 5 key areas that I feel like people need to lead themselves to be proactively ready for future ambushes. If we take a step back, so the Pentagon is what we need to do to be proactive. We also created the REACT methodology, which is, in the military, we talk about immediate action drills. So if a crisis occurs, if a problem happens, what are the steps that we take? What do we train to immediately react to it? And REACT is an acronym specifically that people can use in any aspect of their life to be able to deal with a crisis. And it stands for recognize that you're in a crisis. Oftentimes people, they spend a lot of time, once again, focusing on the discomfort and the pain, the stress. They focus on the past. I want back what I had. I don't want to be in this situation, which unfortunately we can never control the past. All we can do is drive forward and shape the future. So R is recognize you're in a crisis. E is evaluate your assets and inventory. What do you have to bring to bear? What are the tools in your toolbox to bring to this problem? A is assess possible options and outcomes. And we look through, what are the steps? Oftentimes people in a crisis will choose the quickest, easiest avenue. But oftentimes it may put us in a worse situation. So sometimes we have to choose the harder road that sets us up for better success in the long run. C of REACT is you got to choose and communicate to the people around you. And then the last one is you got to take action. So many people are waiting for the perfect moment. They're waiting. I need money to get out of this situation. I need to close this deal. I'm going to wait for the perfect time to speak to my spouse about these relationship problems we're having, whatever it is. You have to take action now. Once we go through this process, the time is now, and time is ticking. The longer you sit on the X, it's like quicksand. The more it pulls you down and the harder it is to get up. I've watched a lot of people. It's no different than a gunfight. People will wither and die on the X. And you may not wither and die physically in the real world when you have life ambushes, but you may wither and die mentally, emotionally, financially. So this is why it's so critical to go through this process. Once you get out of it, and that's how the book is laid out. The very first part of the book is all about, if I'm in a life ambush right now, what are the steps I can take to get out of it? And then the book from there moves forward into how can I proactively be ready for future ambushes? And that is where the Pentagon of Peak Performance comes in. It breaks it down into 5 key areas that people need to lead themselves. Physical leadership, so how we take care of our bodies, nutrition, sleep, and fitness. Mental leadership, how we are constantly challenging our beliefs, how we're consuming knowledge, how we're looking for mentors, how we're trying to always educate ourselves to make ourselves better. Emotional leadership, how we manage our emotions and, calm in the chaos, positivity in the face of negativity. Social leadership, how we invest in the rings of people around us, from our professional relationships all the way to that innermost ring, that innermost bullseye, our family, our close family. And then the last one is spiritual leadership. How do we get outside of ourselves? How do we have perspective? For some people, it's faith. Faith plays a part for me. For others, it's just meditation. It may be yoga. It's whatever you can do to get outside of yourself. There's a great big world out there, and a lot of people sometimes focus specifically just on themselves and their problems. And that spiritual leadership gets you out of that. So that is what we teach, to proactively be ready for future ambushes. If you're strong in those 5 areas, you're better prepared to deal with the crisis that's coming along, as opposed to somebody that may be weak in multiple areas. It's easier to get knocked down and harder to get back up.
We're talking with Jason Redman. The book is Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. And Jason, after you came back to the United States, I believe you're at Bethesda. Is that correct? And it was after a few of your initial visitors came in and expressed pity more than anything else that you had had enough. You decided that this is not going to be the attitude, the mood in here, and you were going to let everybody know before they even walked in whether or not what the mood was going to be like in this room. And so this is what you posted outside your door, and it went viral. Not sure if viral was the term at the time, but it is now. And it said, "Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sorrow or to feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love. I am incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute utmost physically my body has the ability to recover. Then I will push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you are about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense, rapid regrowth. If you are not prepared for that, go elsewhere." From the management. And Jason, you tell the story in the book of asking your young doctor, "So how many more months till I can get back with my unit?" And she said, "I think we're talking years." And so I know a lot of people feel like in the moment, man, I'm going to do this. And then you, of course, lay out in the book, 40 surgeries, 20 skin grafts. I mean, any point along that way, you could have just been, man, this is just too much. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. So it's not just a one-time decision. It's a constant mindset. And so did you already have kind of the react principles in your mind then, or was it something else that got you motivated and kept you going then?
The react methodology wasn't developed like it is now for the book. It's interesting. My first book, The Trident, really was more the memoir, and it was really more the story. But so many people wrote me and said, "How did you do that?" And really Overcome became the answer to that. Here's the step-by-step process. So it's really kind of dissecting everything. The interesting thing, most people think that my injuries were like the worst thing that ever happened to me. But really, I made some leadership mistakes when I was a young officer, and pulling myself out of that hole and rebuilding my trust and credibility from those mistakes was really the hardest path I've ever walked. And that happened prior to my injuries. So that really prepared me. I remember laying in that hospital bed thinking, man, this is going to be hard. This really sucks. But I've been through worse. And that's really what the Overcome mindset is about. It's what I try and teach people. If we need to do things that sometimes make us uncomfortable. We need to drive through discomfort. We need to challenge ourselves, because that's how an Overcome mindset is made. And it better prepares you for further crisis and adversity you're going to counter in your lifetime. It's really hard to just instantly create an Overcome mindset if you've never challenged yourself, if you've just lived a life of leisure and comfort and never really pushed yourself, never developed any grit and resiliency. It's hard to create that in the moment. This is why SEAL training is designed the way it is. So, and I tell everybody, you don't have to be a SEAL to create an Overcome mindset. You can do it through working out. You can do it through challenging yourself to do different things that are outside of your comfort zone. If you are afraid of heights, go rock climbing or go jump out of an airplane. And I know those things are terrifying for people that are afraid of heights, but they're things that push you. And the interesting thing about it is when you do those things, it gives you a little bump in confidence to say, you know what, I did this. I may never want to do it again. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you challenge yourself to do something that's outside of your comfort zone. And that's what builds an Overcome mindset. So laying there in that hospital bed with that sign on the door, and I will tell you, it wasn't an instant thing. I didn't get wounded and be like, man, this is so great. I can't wait to run through this. It was tough. And that sign came about, I want to say about 10 days after I was in the hospital. And there definitely was some soul searching, and there was definitely, some down times in the beginning. But what I realized when those people came in my room, the most powerful thing you have in any crisis is you have a choice. You have a choice in how you're going to deal with it. You can lay down on the X and feel sorry for yourself, which is not going to help the situation in any way. If anything, it just makes it worse usually. Not only do you make it worse for yourself, it pulls everybody else down. I had a wife, I had kids, I had been through this leadership journey. I wanted to be a positive role model for the people around me. So I chose to be positive. I chose to try and drive forward as best I could. And there were ups and downs. I mean, I'm human. I'm, to this day, I still make mistakes, but that sign really personifies that choice. And that is one of the biggest things that I tell people. You always have a choice. You can lay down on the X and be a victim, or you can get up and drive forward and be a victor. And the biggest thing we have to understand is the outcome may not always be what we think it's going to be. And that's a harder thing for people to wrap their heads around, because all of us as humans, we want to see what the end of the race is. We want to know what the finish line looks like. But sometimes when you're in the middle of a storm, we don't know what it looks like. This pandemic is a little bit that way. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. But all we know is somewhere out there, this storm will end. And if you lay on the X and you don't do anything to make yourself better, you may just survive. But what I'm trying to teach in this book is how to be proactive, how to move things forward in your life, how to get off that X and keep driving forward, so that no matter what, when you get to the end, wherever that end is, you will thrive and not just survive.
So, Jason, you referred to some challenges you had prior to being wounded, and it's in the book. We don't really have a lot of time to get into it. I'll let you decide how much you want to get into it. But there had been some, I guess, conclusions about your conduct or leadership. I think it was in Afghanistan. You believed you were unfairly chronicled in that analysis, and they ended up sending you to Ranger School, where you absolutely did not want to be. You went in with a terrible attitude, ended up quitting. What changed between then, later on when you ended up getting wounded, where your mindset was ready for that challenge?
Well, a lot. And I mean, you're absolutely correct. I did quit for just a minute, a period of about 12 hours. But I did thankfully get the opportunity to finish. I had some great leadership, and the Ranger Colonel, I think, recognized that I was making an emotional decision based off things that had happened. And I think he rightly understood that I needed this course, no different than my SEAL leadership that he was friends with recognized I needed this course. I needed it to humble me. I needed it to understand who I was. As leaders, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think for the first time in my life, I realized that I wasn't as great as I thought I was. And most leaders aren't. But when you come to grips with who you are, what your strengths are, and you're aware of your weaknesses, it makes you stronger. And Ranger School was really that defining moment for me to kind of learn who I was and really to push through a very uncomfortable situation in my life. And then to go back to the SEAL teams and face the consequences of some poor decisions, but to slowly earn back the trust of the guys that I had the honor to work with. It was that journey over, several years that really taught me a lot about forging forward, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And ultimately, I managed to do it. I managed to redeem myself and come back. So all of that led to this defining moment of coming to this next life ambush, which was the actual enemy ambush. But it's also, there's other ambushes I've been in. A business ambush that I stepped into, and that was equally very hard. But I have already been through other ambushes. I had built an overcome mindset, and I said, okay, well, we're going to do this the same way we've done these other things. We drive forward. We figure out how to continue to drive forward and get off the X. And, sometimes we go from one X to the next X. And then what do? Well, you reassess, you go through your react, and you keep moving forward, trying to maintain that balance in your life so that you can be healthy and continue to be proactive for the future. Everybody's going to hit life ambushes.
Absolutely right. Shapes are important in this book. You got the pentagon of peak performance, and then there's, I don't know if you refer to it as a triangle or a pyramid, but you talk about different ways you kind of challenge yourself. There's staying on the X, and then there's status quo. And I believe on top of that is some discomfort, and that's where the real growth happens. If you push yourself too far, that's where there can be pain and loss. And so describe that sweet spot of discomfort, which most people probably wouldn't think of as a sweet spot. What does that look like? And how do you know if you've pushed yourself beyond that?
Yeah. So the pyramid of change is something that I saw and just had thought about, that there's 4 different zones within that pyramid. The bottom zone is basically no effort, individuals who could care less whether they're not interested. Most people don't live in this category. The vast majority of people live in the second level, which is the status quo, the comfort zone. Most of us, if you tell us this is the level we need to be at, that is the minimum level that people will get to. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I will say it doesn't create an overcome mindset. And if you always live in the comfort zone, it doesn't prepare you for when crisis comes. The zone above that is the zone of discomfort. This is where we're starting to get outside of our comfort zone. It's a little painful. If you look at it as working out, you're breathing hard. It's a little uncomfortable. Your muscles are burning. And then the zone above that is the zone of burnout. And this is where a lot of type A people drive themselves from the zone of discomfort into burnout. And they think, man, if I live at this level for a long time, I was guilty of this for a while. The problem is you can't sustain that zone for a long time. You will literally burn out. It leads to pain. It leads to mistakes. The sweet spot where your truly elite people live is they go back and forth. It's an infinite loop between the comfort zone and the zone of discomfort. So what they recognize is, hey, right now I've achieved a level of comfort within my life. I've got systems in place and those systems are working, but I know that if I want to be better, I got to push myself just a little bit more. And they get out of their comfort zone and, whatever goals they set for themselves, they say, I'm going to bump this up just a little. And it's not unrealistic, but it's just enough to make you uncomfortable. And they push towards that goal until suddenly that zone of discomfort becomes their new comfort zone. They have raised the bar in their life. And truly elite people who constantly have a overcome mindset, have the ability to deal with adversity, they live in this infinite loop where they go from the comfort zone into that zone of discomfort, turn it into their new comfort zone, and they just continue going back and forth, just never peaking, continuing to just slowly move up. And it's not these gigantic leaps. It's small incremental gains lead to massive success over the period of their lives. So that is what I, talk about in how we push for change in our own lives.
Jason, you mentioned earlier that your SEAL training really helped with this because obviously they push you to the limit, and getting through that is a massive accomplishment. And other military units obviously have intense training. I would probably argue, and I'm sure you would, that the SEAL training is about as tough as it gets. So to what extent have you been able to use this overcome mindset with other veterans? I'm thinking perhaps folks with post-traumatic stress or physical injuries that have gotten them down. I know there's still great concern about the suicide rate. So how have you been able to help others with this?
When I ran my nonprofit that we phased down the end of 2018, we ran a program that a lot of what's in this book, specifically I designed for that program called the Overcome Academy. And it was for wounded warriors to help them get off the X. And that really was where that original idea came from. I learned some things. I learned that unfortunately, some people, you cannot drag people off the X. People have to be willing to get off the X. They have to get to that recognize I'm in a crisis and I want to move forward. But when people get to that point, if you give them the steps, it is pretty amazing. I mean, I saw some incredible wounded warriors who are really struggling, who really turned around their lives. And now I actually talk about several of those wounded warriors in the Overcome book, individuals who really are just amazing rock stars, guys who, whether they suffered mental, physical, or emotional trauma, now are out there making a difference, whether it's in their family, their community, or even within the veteran space. So it absolutely works, and it works for a civilian no different than it will for a veteran that's struggling. But it's not a magic sauce. It's not a magic wand. It is some introspection, and it is some work. It is getting outside of the comfort zone. It is being willing to get up and get off that X, accepting that you're not a victim, and moving forward.
Jason, you've obviously had a profound impact on a lot of people, both through the attention you got to the statement that was in your hospital room and now the difference you're making one-on-one with these folks. As we exit here, I'm sure you're proud of your service in uniform, but you've also had such a huge impact out of uniform. What do you see as some of the most significant service that you've done?
Definitely working with wounded warriors. I mean, right now, you nailed it. I've lost too many friends to suicide. So I've been trying to help. There's several different organizations I'm working with. Project Headstrong is a group that's providing mental health support to 9/11 veterans, trying to fight that scourge that we're seeing, and also trying to fight the stigma. I mean, I've tried to get out there and say, hey, look, if I'm a special operations warrior that struggled with PTSD, it's okay. You can too. And it's okay to ask for help. And then the other part of the equation that I really believe is a massive problem within this current generation of veterans is the traumatic brain injuries. I think that it is the signature injury of this war, both from the way we train now in frontline combat units with the amount of explosives we use, heavy weapons, things like that, breaching, I think, and then on top of the IED impact of being overseas and being exposed to a lot of blasts. I think it's creating a physiological impact on a lot of veterans that are coming home that is manifesting itself in whether it's minor or moderate TBIs that I think is contributing to the suicide problem. And that, unfortunately, is not something that we fully understand. I'm working with a group called the Concussion Legacy Foundation, and I know that DOD is doing a lot of research on that also. So I'm trying to raise awareness for that. And then beyond that, I'm just trying to get out there and spread a positive message to try and help people become the best version of themselves. I look at it like in the military, we have point men. And the point man's job is to help you get to where you're going, to lay out the course, to identify the obstacles, to identify the dangers, and to try and find the best, most efficient path. And I want to be a point man for other people out there to help them figure out how to lay that path and then to teach them how to be a point man for their own lives.
The book is Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. And we've been talking with retired U.S. Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Jason Redman. And Jason, great to talk to you again. We're obviously incredibly grateful for your service in uniform over so many years, but the service you're providing now is so critical to so many as well. Thank you very much for being with us.
Greg, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. Once again, that's retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Jason Redman, 11 years as an enlisted SEAL, 10 years as a SEAL officer. The new book, Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. I'm Greg Corumbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.